Next topic I want to hit today. It's amazing. I always think of more topics than time. And I tell you that a lot too. If you listen to the show all the time, I'm always saying that. But I want to talk a little bit about something that I understood better about this idea of herd immunity. So I heard this Dr. Katz, and you've been hearing about Dr. Katz. I mentioned him. He's the one early on in this American response to the coronavirus who wrote a lengthy piece, an editorial at the New York Times, in which he essentially said he's a Yale doctor. He is a specialist in contagious diseases and immune system. I mean, he gets this whole arena of thought that we're all focused on. And very early on, he wrote and published and has been speaking about the idea that from the start, when we recognize this virus was very challenging, and it is very challenging, we should have gone with his term, vertical interdiction. We should have shaped our policies around the idea of protecting the vulnerable and susceptible, the elderly, those with immune deficiencies or other problems, pre-existing health problems that make them vulnerable to the coronavirus. We should have protected them and allow the rest of America, the healthy, and those who want to work, we should have let them continue functioning in daily life. He calls that vertical interdiction, put a silo around the susceptible, as opposed to horizontal interdiction, which is making policy that limits and directs the behavior of every single American as we are now, what we are now living, which is pretty much everyone except for a few states are living in forced shutdowns of their state. Everyone's in a shelter in place, can't go out, order, can't go to work, can't open your business. So I heard Dr. Katz speak last night. He was actually interviewed. And I'll tell you, folks, it's so funny. I never watch television. I mean, never. I turned on, I forget what I was looking for. But anyway, I saw Dr. Katz was on Mark Levin's show. And so I don't have a recording of it. And I urge you, if you can, to go play that show. Mark Levin had Dr. Katz on, the same guy who was talking about vertical interdiction. And he was explaining things I want to explain to you because I think it's really important to understand how the policy we chose that was, dictated essentially the social distancing, which means social distancing requires everybody has to be home. You can't be in a place where a bunch of people are together. So social distancing, all the hand washing, of course, is fine, but the hand washing, masks, and all that, leave that aside. But the social distancing thing, the reason we did that was because that was what Doctors Fauci and Birx and probably others told the president was the best plan. What Katz has been saying is, no, that wasn't the best plan. But what I heard him explain last night, I want to tell you. He essentially is talking about the idea that, we have viruses, the world is filled with viruses. I looked up the numbers on several websites, and I didn't bring them with me today. I'll get to them another day. But, there are hundreds of thousands of viruses. It's not like, it's a rare thing we get new viruses. New viruses are discovered all the time. And in normal path of the way cultures deal with viruses is that when healthy people go out in the world, do their daily life, they come in contact with a virus. So they have gotten infected by the virus, their body responds and fights off the virus and creates antibodies. Once you have contracted coronavirus, you get through it, and then you're back to healthy. You have antibodies, which are essentially, they are like you got a vaccination, like you are immune from the virus due to the own antibodies you carry. What he explained to Mark Levin last night was normally how we have been able, not just America, but societies through history, have been able to overcome viruses is because we have a significant number of people getting out in the world. And we do every day, of course. Before coronavirus came along, everyone was living their life and doing their thing, do whatever they do, and encountering viruses. So ultimately, when a significant percentage of people have come in contact with a new virus and had it, worked through it, had their system fight it off, their system develop antibodies, those people can no longer become infected and can no longer spread the virus. So the example Dr. Katz gave on Mark Levin's show was, look, if Mark Levin was someone who was susceptible to the virus and was in some category of concern, and he, Dr. Katz, had the virus, got through it, had the antibodies, he could shake Mark Levin's hand and he would not transmit the virus. That's what Katz was explaining. So the more Americans who get out, And he said, basically, in plain English, we need more people to get out, come in contact with the virus, get over it, and develop antibodies. So we have herd, H-E-R-D, like, a herd of cattle, but in America, a herd of people in our country who have overcome it. We're then reducing the more people who have herd immunity, who have the antibodies, so they are immune. The more people are like that, the fewer people there are who can infect the vulnerable. The vulnerable are more protected in a culture where most people have developed immunity. A couple of things he said. It was the most fascinating interview. And, I'm not a medical person or a doctor or anything. I'm just telling you that I learned so much. I want to, if you get a chance to listen to it, he had a couple of the really great points I want to share with you. One was that, they've been talking about testing, and that was, I meant to mention earlier, the congressional bipartisan thing, the big issue they pushed was testing. And so they're basically saying we've got to really move forward and test more Americans, because everyone's been saying we don't know the denominator. We don't know how many people have actually encountered the virus. So, as a very simple thing, if you tested 10 people and all 10 people had the virus, you would say, wow, there's a 100% infection rate. But if you had 10 people have the virus, but you check 2,000 and you still only have 10 people, then it's only 10 out of 2,000. The denominator of uninfected people changes the infection rate. Same thing applies with respect to the fatality rate. So he's saying CDC does not have to test every American. Just like in polling, when you hear polls and say, 34% of Americans think X, well, they didn't really ask every American. They used the concept of representative sample. They go around representative sample. We're going to pick, X percentage of, Democrats or Republicans or women or men or whatever the criteria are. And that's how they get a representative sample. Well, Katz is saying the CDC uses representative random sampling, meaning they already have in place a process they use other times to gather data. So they don't really have to test every American or even a majority of Americans. They can do the same kind of thing as polling and select a representative random sample, and that is not a lengthy process. And that is what they should be doing. That was his first point. He also talked about, as we get past the coronavirus in this country, we have to be honest about the fact that CDC encouraged doctors to list coronavirus as a cause of death in cases where it wasn't. If you missed that, we've had that story before in the show, but the CDC put out advice to doctors and hospitals that they could put coronavirus as the cause of death, even when they don't know, but they're just guessing. They think it was the cause of death, but they don't know because they didn't ever test the person. And even though the person may have had a series of underlying health claims, which also could have led to morbidity, led to their death, but they, in addition to diabetes, heart disease, and obesity, they contracted the virus. Well, all those other conditions contributed to, and maybe were the primary contributor to the death. But CDC says, no, count them as coronavirus deaths. So we have a larger number of deaths being reported than is really honest. But his point about it was, we ought to, as a country, this virus is calling attention to the fact that in our country, we've had all sorts of morbidity, vulnerability in diseases where we don't pay that much attention. We just don't worry that much. And we know there are people who are obese, who have diabetes, who have heart disease, many of these things being preventable with better health care. And these things are now leading to death. He's saying one thing we ought to learn is let's get after those causes of death as a country, and so we aren't so vulnerable to a virus another time. He did say what makes coronavirus unique is that the intensity of care required for the people who have the extremely bad reactions to coronavirus is uniquely high. That, if you become very sick with coronavirus, which most people don't. Again, Ben Carson says 98% of people survive, something in the range of 80% don't even know they have it. But for the people who have the really bad reactions, it requires uniquely high intensive care. He said, so he's basically saying no one size fits all answer for the states. They've all got to get their own situation. I want to pass that along to you because I think that the herd immunity and other factors that Dr. Katz went through can help all of us be smarter in how we think about coronavirus, how we assess how we're doing as a country dealing with it. And again, I urge you, if you have the time and you can find it, to go listen to the whole interview. It was very informative and very substantive, very serious, very, very impressive. And that, again, was Dr. Katz on Mark Levin Show.